West Virginia mountain melody. There's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free. Your West Virginia mountain melodies.
Welcome. Today we are joined on Around and About the Clarksburg History Museum with Tom Felt. Tom is the director of the Museum of American Glass in West Virginia, and it's located in Weston. Tom, welcome to our podcast today.
I'm very happy to be here.
We're going to talk glass, which is something we both love to talk about. Central West Virginia has an extremely rich history dealing with the glass industry. But first, before we get started, I'd like to ask about your museum. It's located in Weston, so tell us exactly how to get there from Clarksburg and your hours of operation.
Just straight down Route 79, take the Weston exit, basically go to the end of the street, turn left, and you'll see a huge glass mural.
It is beautiful,
too. That will let you know you've arrived. We are open from 9:30 to 5 every day except Sunday when we're open from 1 to 5. Free admission. We love donations.
Always
because
need those.
We are a nonprofit organization, and so we rely on our memberships and donations. We've been in existence for, and I should have looked this up, I think it's 36 years now.
Oh, has it been that long?
Yeah. And I've been part of it for most of that time, although originally I lived in the Washington, D.C. area. And after I retired, realized that, driving 6 hours back and forth to volunteer meant something I could only do occasionally. And so when somebody whispered into my ear, "Wouldn't you like to come to the museum and be our archivist?" I said, yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Talked with my partner about it. He was not quite as enthusiastic. In fact, his initial response was, "Hell no." But I dragged him kicking and screaming, and he became as much of a part of the museum as I've been for the last, close to 35, 40 years.
My goodness, that's
at
great.
least.
I tell you, my first visit there, I was sort of awestruck. There is so much glass in there, and it's so beautifully displayed. How many pieces of glass are on display?
The last time we counted, I believe it was around 18,000 pieces.
Goodness.
And that did not count the National Marble Museum.
That is the other thing. You have a tremendous display of that.
Yes, indeed we do.
Is this glass from all over the country?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So is it in different sections, like this is Ohio glass and that way?
No,
or is that how you have
it was interesting when we moved into the building we're in now, which we've been in for probably 16, 17 years, which used to be just prior to us an antique mall, and before that it was the Penny's department store on downtown Main Avenue. We had 10,000 square feet to fill.
Oh my.
And we just moved out of like a 600 square foot smaller building down the street from where we are.
But that's a good problem to have when you're a museum.
Oh yeah. I went in there and did a happy dance, This is wonderful. This will last us for years. Of course, now we've maxed it out already, but so how do you display glass when you're trying to do everything made in glass in America? That's kind of a large order. And if you actually talk to people about the idea of doing that, because you're talking about thousands of factories across the country, you're talking about everything from flat glass, window glass, bottles, insulators, blown, cut glass. How do you tell that story? Do you try to do it chronologically? Sometimes that works. A lot of times it doesn't. Do you do it by type of glass, like all carnival glass together, all cut glass together? And sometimes, yes, that's exactly what we do. Do you do it by company? And yeah, sometimes that works. So it ends up being a hodgepodge.
Which is nice
It
because you have
is.
variety
You're going to
everywhere you look.
experience something different as you move from case to case. It's going to be a completely different experience for you.
And you also have, which I'm impressed with, is the library that you have.
Yes.
If anyone's doing research on glass.
Yeah. We have a major research library, and I forget how many hundreds, probably close to 1,000 books on glass that we have in the library. We also have extensive archival material, original paperwork from factories, including a number of local factories that we've been fortunate enough to preserve. We have all kinds of original catalogs, again, from local companies, from companies all over the United States. We have the entire archives of the American Flint Glass Workers Union, which was the earliest labor organization established in the United States, lasted for over 100 years. Glass industry started going away, which is one of the sad facts that we're dealing with. So their membership dwindled, and they eventually were absorbed by the Steelworkers Union. And they still are an active part of the Steelworkers Union, but with far, far fewer factories representative than used to be. So we have well over 100 years of labor history that does not exist anywhere else in the world.
That's
if you
amazing.
want to use that material for research, it's always available. But Weston is the only place you can come to have access to it.
And it has a lot about Clarksburg in it,
Oh,
and all the
huge
areas
amount.
that have the
Yes.
glass in West Virginia.
Yeah.
That I could spend hours in that library. It's wonderful.
Yes.
You also, throughout the year, have many different activities.
Yes, we do.
I know you have one, and I'm hoping we'll get this out before the October event, but tell about, you have an October event coming up.
Yeah, coming up on October 24th to 26th is our annual glass gathering. We do that every year in a different location, but we usually come back to Weston every other year. And so this year we're back in Weston. It's a combination of 1 day of doing tours, if we can find some place to tour that we haven't already done, and other kinds of hands-on activities, and then a full day of some of the major people who are researching and studying glass come and give presentations. This year we're doing things a little bit differently because on Friday, which is the 25th, we will do everything at the museum, and we're going to do a film festival showing films ranging from one wonderful film that the Fostoria Glass Company did back in the 1940s, showing how glass was made at that time.
Okay.
And it's just a really fun way and a great learning experience. And then we'll do a whole bunch of other movies. We haven't decided exactly which ones, but there will be movies going all day long with popcorn, of course.
That's fun.
And people can come and go as they please. Those who choose to can visit Appalachian Glass in Weston, which is the glass blowing studio that is still active there, or they can also visit Catherine Miller in Buchanan. She is a really high quality, wonderful, wonderful artist who does engraving on glass. And semi-retired at this point, but she's going to open up her studio for us.
Where is that at in Buchanan?
I have been there and I don't remember the exact location. It's as you're going into town.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's nice to.
But
if
of
you're
course,
interested.
anyone who wants to sign up for the tour, we'll make sure they have directions to get there on their own.
And what an artist you are to work with glass. I just think to etch it or
amazing.
blow it or.
Yeah. I don't really know how these people have the talent to do the things they do. And her work is exquisite. Also on Friday, we're going to do a series of mini tours. We will sign up 8 to 10 people for each tour. One is going to be behind the scenes, so you can go up and see what goes on upstairs in the areas that ordinarily the public would not be allowed to visit. We'll do one early American pattern glass, which is the glass that was popular from the 1870s up till about 1915, 1916. We're going to do one on cut glass. That's the one that I'll be leading. Cut glass being probably the highest quality glassware made in this country because of the skill involved in actually cutting, usually from behind, so you couldn't even see what you were cutting, these extremely intricate patterns. We're going to do one on perfume bottles and other boudoir.
And there's whole collectors that just do perfume bottles.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That was one of the reasons we decided to do these mini tours, to see if we couldn't attract some people who might not ordinarily come to one of these events, but find something that they really are interested in.
Or maybe you don't even know that you would be interested in it until you attend one of the seminars.
Yeah. So that'll be Friday. Then Saturday, we're moving up to Bridgeport. To the conference center there.
Okay.
We had hoped to find a venue down in Weston that would accommodate us. But even starting in January, places like Lambert's Winery, which would have been wonderful, was already booked for the entire month, mostly weddings.
Well, that's good, though. Then you come into Harrison County for a little
So we're coming
bit.
up to Harrison County, and that will be our base location for the Saturday
And will that
seminars.
be speakers? And
that will be speakers. We're going to have a talk on marbles.
Oh.
Marbles are really important in this area, and when we start talking about the Clarksburg area glass factories, that'll definitely be something that will come up. We'll be doing a presentation on Vaseline glass. Now, a lot of people today know Vaseline or canary glass as glowy glass, because it's the glass, if you turn a black light on it, it turns a bright, bright green, which is...
that's striking.
It's very striking. It also is something that...
Now, what would they have made with that? Give me an example.
Everything.
Everything?
You could get tableware, you could get goblets, you could get candlesticks.
What makes it glow?
Uranium.
Oh,
Yeah.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, and that was one reason why there's very little uranium glass being made today, because it's mostly a prescribed substance, and you have to have very, very special handling of it, which back in the days, in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, they just had that right in the factory.
Oh, I bet there were a lot of deaths because of that.
I think that's probably very true.
That would be an interesting subject to explore.
Glass factories could be very, very dangerous places, because you had all of this acid etching going on, so you had vats of acid that they were around all the time.
And the chemicals to make the glass?
And the chemicals, yeah.
Oh, that would be an interesting seminar, though.
It would be, yeah. So that's going to be one of the talks. There's a glass known as stretch glass, which is a form of iridized glass, but not quite as bright as carnival glass. It is a sprayed-on finish, though, like carnival glass is, that has iridescence to it. But then they treat it in such a way that after they spray it on and they finish the final piece, it pulls that decoration apart a little bit, so you get this stretch effect.
Ooh.
Sometimes very markedly, sometimes very subtly. And this happens to be the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Society of Stretch Glass Collectors.
Is that like the vases? They would be real...
A lot. No, that's something known as swung vases.
Oh, okay.
And you can actually have swung vases with a stretch finish. Yeah,
So these are all
swung-based.
interesting things that
Oh,
I'm not familiar with I could learn more about.
absolutely.
Is that an all-day seminar, or is that just?
Yeah, it's a total of 5 seminars. So we start around 10 in the morning, and then we'll finish up around 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon, at which point we have a magic show, which you've got to see to believe. And then after that, we do a silent auction, which sometimes is not so terribly silent. So,
Kind of competitive,
but
isn't it?
can
On the
be
bidding.
very competitive. And of course, it's a fundraiser for the museum, so it's all donated glass. So we try to encourage that competition as much as we possibly can.
Now, if someone's interested in this conference, how do they get in touch with you?
You can either call the museum at 304-269-5006, or you can go to our website, which is magwv.org.
And we'll have this on our podcast site.
Great. And there will be a registration form there.
Is there a deadline to register?
I'm not sure that we've set one, but in order to make sure that we have all the food and everything in place that we need, I would say probably the very latest would be maybe the 15th of October.
Okay.
We would prefer it even a little bit earlier, but then that's also to give people a chance to choose the tours they want to take and the other things going on that they might want to participate in, so that we can make sure we've got that allocated so that
Now, the museum has other things throughout the year, and the one I always wanted to go to in February, you have the Chocolate Lovers.
Yes.
Just briefly, a little bit about that.
We've been doing that for about 6 years now. It's all locally donated chocolate, no commercial chocolate. It's all made by scratch by local people who donate it. And we sometimes have as many as 100 different types of chocolate, ranging all the way from, typical chocolate candies and cupcakes and brownies and things of that sort.
And this is at the museum.
It's at the museum.
Usually around Valentine's Day.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you spread it all out in the glassware?
And we spread it all out. We just put tables down the big aisle, and it's all you can eat. I'm not sure if we're going to raise the price this year or not, but it's always been, I think, a very reasonable $10.
That's very reasonable for as much as you want to eat.
For as much as you can eat. And we've had people come in and say, "Oh, I'm in heaven. I just want to stay here forever." And then they get defeated. There's no way they can possibly eat that much chocolate.
That's great.
So
and you have a lot of
wonderful.
things throughout the year.
Yes, we do.
So do you have on your website, do you have like a calendar of events?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, check that out, because if you've never been to your museum, if you love, even if you're not even familiar with glass, go in there and you will be just enthralled by it.
We have always surprised people, particularly in one of the things about doing this chocolate festival is nice, that it gets local people in. And they've been saying, "Oh, I've been driving past this place for years and it never occurred to me to stop. And this is wonderful."
It's a little hidden gem in Weston.
It just, I would challenge anybody, man, woman, or child, to come into that museum and not find something to get excited about.
And, too, Tom, it brings back memories.
Mm-hmm.
Like you'll see a piece that, oh, my grandma had that.
Exactly. That's one of the things that's unique about us. There are other better funded museums, larger museums of glass. There are a lot of specialized museums of glass, but there's no one attempting to do everything in glass, including the stuff that most people would look at, "Well, that's not museum quality." Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
It's part of our history and our heritage.
Right.
And especially with the diminution of the glass industry in this country, and it used to be one of the preeminent countries in the world for production of glassware. We just need to make sure that that history and heritage does not get lost.
Right.
And especially in this area.
Right. So let's talk about a little bit about the history. Maybe around in Harrison County, but my goodness, Weston had several glass factories. Yeah. All the surrounding areas did. It was a big industry.
It was huge. Now, if you look at West Virginia and consider the size of the state compared to, say, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, some of the other major glass producing areas, per capita, we probably had more glass factories than any other state, just because we were smaller.
Was it also the advent of natural gas? Was that the big catalyst to bring the glass plants in here?
In the beginning, it was actually coal.
Oh, okay.
Because before natural gas was found to be a much better method of heating your furnaces. Coal was available here readily, as of course we know. And then once natural gas came, and that's why that entire gas belt, that, what do they call it, the Marcellus something, that extends from West Virginia all the way up through Pennsylvania into parts of New York and over into Indiana and Ohio. It became very, very attractive to start a glass factory in this area.
I think I've read, like in Clarksburg, like they would entice people that we'll give you free gas for I don't know how long if you'll put your plant here.
Yeah.
And that's how they started coming in with that.
And the other factor, particularly in this area and also going on down to Lewis County, we're close to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was already a well-established glass hub of manufacture. And so there were a lot of experienced glass people up there who could be enticed to come down. We'll give you housing.
Let's talk about that a minute, because was it mostly your immigrants from Belgium and maybe France that would be your glass makers?
To some extent, but also a lot of Italians. And
okay.
Of course, the Italian was big in this area.
Yeah.
And some of the Scandinavian countries, excuse me, who had brought skills from the old world to the new, and then honed them in the Pittsburgh area, for instance, and then you make use of them down here.
And some of them were like carried on from father to son.
Yes.
It was generational.
Very definitely.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but like they would bring in a Belgian glass cutter, and they would more or less hire their family over just someone else living here that wanted to do the job. But and then also there were children that worked in the glass factory.
I was just going to say, you have to keep in mind, if you go back far enough, and you actually do not have to go back as far as when the Child Labor Act was established, because for many years after that, the glass industry was exempted. So they could still have 12 years old.
Yeah, you see these pictures of the little, I mean, they just look like little tiny boys working right on. What would they do in the factory? What would their job be?
They would actually start out as what they call carrying in boys. And once they did away with child labor and had adults doing the carrying in, and I'll explain what that is, they still call them carrying in boys.
Oh.
And I recently saw a photograph of a factory, probably from the 1930s, 1940s, where there were some African-American women working as carrying in boys.
Is that right? Yeah. I've never heard that.
Very unusual.
Those would be like the first women to work in the glass factory.
Yes. Yeah. And that was rare. I mean, it later became much more common than it did in those days. But anyway, yes, the boys would start out as carrying in boys, which means that as a glass maker finished shaping a piece, either a blown piece or they pulled it out of a mold and did whatever they needed to do to put it in its final form, it would go on what's known as a punty rod, which is almost like a big pair of calipers that would hold the piece while you ran, literally in some cases, to the leers. The leers being a heated conveyor belt type of oven that you would put the piece down at the hottest end, and then it would slowly move down the conveyor belt from anywhere from 10 to 12 hours. And by the time it got to the end of the leer, it was cooled down. And that's how they annealed the piece so that it wouldn't have a tendency to explode, like if you put hot water or cold water in it.
Could you imagine, though, how
And so-
hot and
Extremely hot. You've got these 12-year-old boys, probably a lot of them barefoot, running through the glass factory, carrying these hugely, sometimes very heavy pieces of semi-molten glass that's come out of the mold or been blown by the glass blower. And
how many hours a day would they have to work?
Because
there was no unions back at that
well,
point.
yeah, there were unions.
Were there?
And there were what they called turns set up, which was usually a 4-hour turn where you would be making the same item for 4 hours. And then you would have a break of maybe an hour for lunch. And then you'd do a second 4-hour one. So they'd be working for 4 hours at a time, sometimes 4.5 or 5 hours.
Would that be a better job, though, if you, as a child, you don't have much of a choice? Would that be a better job than working in the mines?
Probably.
Probably would be a little bit better, but not much.
Yeah, and not a pleasant job, no.
I wanted to...
It's just one brief story that always amuses me. I've spent a lot of my time going through the old trade journals for the crockery and glassware industry. And there would be reports periodically, like maybe 2 or 3 times a year, so-and-so factory, the small help, went on strike.
Really?
And it turned out there was a ball game that day. So they were back at work the next day.
How cute.
Boys will be boys.
That's right. That's right. I was going to say a little bit about Clarksburg. I read that the first factory was Republic Glass in Clarksburg. It started in 1900, and they made decorative glass and tableware. Was the decorative glass industry like your more prominent than, let's say, window glass at that time? I mean, did they have, in 1900, did they have a way to make window glass easily?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And in fact, the Lafayette Window Glass Company here in Clarksburg started a year before Republic Glass.
Oh, it did? Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, I didn't understand that.
And
okay.
I'm not sure. They continued operating until 1925 doing window glass, so it was major.
They had a big fire, I believe.
Yeah, and there were dozens of window glass factories in Clarksburg, or basically in Harrison County.
Yeah, the Lafayette Window Glass Factory in Northview, fire destroyed it March 25th, 1919. And that later was the Roland division of Forco Glass occupied that same site.
Right. And that continued up until just fairly recently.
The other thing on glass I never thought about was how big of an industry just to make the chimneys.
Yes.
I never thought about that before, but that was a big job. And there were several places around in Harrison County that just made for chimneys because you didn't have electric.
Right.
So you had the oil lamps, and you had to have the chimneys for them.
And even well after electricity did become fairly common, you still had a lot of rural areas in the county that did not have the electricity. And you had kind of a built-in population of people who didn't trust electricity. And so into the 1930s, 1940s, they still preferred the oil lamp.
And I found this the other day. I'm just so excited when I find these things. Over in Bridgeport, everyone, and I've passed by this 100 times. There's a bridge over in Bridgeport by the tennis courts, and it's an arched bridge. I never realized that that was the bridge that was built for the Bridgeport Lamp Chimney Company in 1904.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's where the workers went across that little creek there to get to the factory.
To the factory. I don't think I knew that
But
either.
Tom, it said the company flourished following World War I when a total of 24,000 lamp chimneys were produced each day.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It's just absolutely amazing. The amount of glass that was made in, as I say, a relatively small area up here in north central West Virginia.
Yeah. I mean, you just don't realize. I looked in Dorothy Davis's book. I mean, there was like at the beginning, it looks like 1900 might have been the top
That was
year.
the first for for the tableware and some of the other stuff that Clarksburg is particularly well known for.
But like up until 1967, there were 17 just decorative glass plants.
Yeah.
And then window glass, there were 17 different plants. Yeah. What's the difference though between blown glass, pressed glass? What's the procedure? I mean, what's different about that?
It's a little bit hard to explain without being able to do visual aids, but pressed glass, you have a mold, which is usually a 2 or 3 part, very large, made of steel, heavy cast steel that is hinged. It opens up. You can close it so that it becomes completely enclosed, and then you get your gather of glass from the glory hole, which is the portion of the furnace that is open to the glass worker to put their rods in to pull these lumps of glass out, of molten glass out, and then you pour it into the mold, and then you close the mold tightly around it, open it up again, and a formed piece comes out.
Oh, okay.
Now,
so you even had people that worked in the factories that made the molds, right?
Oh, yes, very much.
Okay.
And in fact, as far as the glass factories still in existence in the United States today, that's the major part of the industry that still survives, is mold makers. Molds were one of the major assets that a factory had. A lot of money would be put into creating the molds, because then they could be used over and over and over again. Now, after a piece came out of a mold, sometimes there still had to be some hand stuff done to it. For instance, it was often easier to mold something with a cupped foot, where it actually looked like an upside down drinking glass on the bottom of, say, of a bowl or something similar to that. Then that would be flattened out to actually make the flat foot, which you expect to find on a comport, for instance.
But you'd have to do that pretty quickly.
You have to do that while it's still molten enough, and then you've got to get it to the carrying in boy in time for him to get it into the leer to start annealing. Now, blown glass sometimes also uses a mold, but the difference between a strictly blown or strictly molded piece and a strictly blown piece is that you the gatherer brings this glob of glass on the end of a blow rod, gives it to the blower, who blows it out and forms a large bubble. And if you're doing strictly freehand blown glass, that's basically the end of the process. Then the blower does everything he needs to do, say, to make it into a goblet or whatever it is. But if you're using a mold, instead of blowing that bubble straight out in the air and then manipulating it, he blows it down into a mold where it takes on the rough characteristics of the mold. When it comes out of that mold, it's not a final product until he blows it out further. And again, I almost need to show you a picture of what I'm talking
Well,
about.
Go to
so you
Appalachian
understand.
Glass to
Yeah.
see them, because they blow glass there.
Oh yeah, they do indeed.
That would, you'd have to be a special type of person to be able to blow out that all day, you know, blow glass like that. You better have a good set of lungs to do that. It's beautiful though. Like, it's amazing to me how you just see this blob and then they form it into this beautiful bowl or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like magic almost.
Yes. And these guys thought they were just working. I mean,
it was just a job.
They didn't consider this was artistry of any sort. And
did they get paid though a little bit more than the other person would?
Yeah. That was one of the things that the union was responsible for, was working out wage and turns. So turns, I mentioned, was the amount of time they would work during the day. But then they would also determine, well, to make this particular piece, say you're doing a wine glass, and you're going to blow the wine bowl, but you're going to press the stem, and then you're going to apply freehand the bottom of the wine glass. So they have to make a determination of how many people does it take to do that. And it might, in fact, take 5 different people.
Wow.
Because you might need your blower, you might need a presser. You most likely would need 1 or 2 other people, like the foot setter would usually be a separate job. And they would be turning these out like hundreds an hour.
And 24 hours a day. It didn't close down.
Yeah.
It's I don't think people, like younger people, realize what was involved in all of that and how important that was to a community.
Oh yeah. When I first came here, I moved here about 17 years ago, about the time that we moved into our current location. I attended a function that was done to raise money for us at Appalachian Glass. And I'd say there were maybe 100, 150 people in the audience. And when I was asked, well, why is the Museum of American Glass here in Weston? And I asked them, how many people either worked in or knew somebody who worked in a glass factory? And I would say 98% of the hands went up.
Yeah.
And then I asked a second question, and how many of you currently work in or have somebody who works? And Chip Turner and his mother, I think, were the only hands that went up.
That was it.
And that's, I mean, nobody dreamed that the glass industry would go away that quickly.
No, because it was a good job that maybe your grandfather had worked at, and you thought you would be there forever. Yeah. And then one day it just all disappeared.
And then it was all gone. So,
if we could, let's talk a little bit about Hazel Atlas and some of the places here in Clarksburg. Like Hazel Atlas, what were they known for?
Hazel Atlas was primarily a dinnerware, decorated tumbler, glass that you would use around the house, as opposed to, they did some things like vases and things of that sort, but it was primarily serving pieces. And what set Hazel Atlas aside in many ways and made it one of the major companies here in Clarksburg was that they were one of the innovators in doing machine-made glassware. So as opposed to having a glass blower or somebody physically dropping a lump glass into a mold and then creating a piece, they were using machines to do those functions. Not terribly popular with the traditional glass workers when they were developed in the early 1900s. But it allowed them to turn out like 10,000 pieces in a time where a glass blowing team could maybe do 4,000.
Was that developed in Clarksburg, that machine?
A lot of it was.
Really?
Because of
Okay.
it. Hazel Atlas was actually a huge conglomerate that originally started in Washington, Pennsylvania, I believe, and then eventually had like at least 6 major factories scattered around, one of which was the Hazel Atlas factory here in Clarksburg.
Yeah, I think I see where they started in 1902
Yes, yeah.
in Northview.
And they, at some point, were taken over by
I think
Continental Can
Continental
Company.
Can, 1956.
Yeah. And at that point, there had been a labor arbitration, or not labor, monopoly case brought against Hazel Atlas because they have these huge factories all over the place, and they had become a monopoly. And all of the other factories, except the one here in Clarksburg, were divested.
Oh, okay.
The one here in Clarksburg remained the only Hazel Atlas factory. And I may have my chronology a little bit long here, but I think all of the other factories were divested to, I'm having a moment, Brockway.
Oh, okay.
But Brockway did not get the factory here in Clarksburg. About 10 years later, that factory was sold to Brockway, and so it was operated as Brockway for maybe another 10 years or so, at which point it was sold to Anchor Hocking, and they just operated it for a few more years. Dean Six, who was the founder of the Museum of American Glass in West Virginia, wrote a book called West Virginia Glass Towns, and he lists 75 factories that were here in Harrison County.
Wow.
That doesn't necessarily mean there were 75 separate physical factories, because a lot of them simply changed name. They either changed ownership, or they may have gone into bankruptcy and somebody else bought them and started them up again. But that gives you an idea of just how huge the industry was here in Clarksburg.
So what was different between, let's say, a Hazel Atlas plant and then like a Pittsburgh plate glass plant? That was like window glass, I assume?
That was strictly window
windshields
glass.
And
yeah, windshields, flat glass, anything that required large panes of glass. So entirely different techniques. Although interesting, the very earliest window glass factories actually were blown window glass.
Is that why it was so thick, Tom? I'd seen.
Well, they would blow huge cylinders, like maybe 6 foot long, and then they would cut and flatten those cylinders to make flat glass.
Wow, that would be hard, wouldn't
Yeah,
it?
and then of course they developed the ability to do that largely by machine. And the skill then involved for the glassmakers in the window glass factories was being able to cut that into the appropriate sizes and do the beveling. And
now, my father worked Pittsburgh plate for 12 years, but he told me like they wanted the Belgium glass cutters to do the glass cutting. But he would tell me about how that rolls of glass would be coming out, and sometimes they'd shatter.
Yeah,
there's horrible accidents with that.
Yes.
But he would tell me like all the chemicals they had to mix all this with. He would have to dust off his lunchbox because it'd be white, with polyarsenic and all these horrible chemicals and everything.
It's no wonder that there were an awful lot of glass workers who ended up with lung disease and other diseases that at that point they didn't connect.
They didn't know about.
To what they were doing every day.
Like in the mines with black lung and all that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you too about, let's go back to Hazel Atlas. There was a whole, I'm fascinated. I brought in some glasses for Tom to see today, and we'll show them on the podcast. But the decorations on these. Tell me how that came about. Like you'd get a tumbler, and mostly women would have this job, I think, painting or stenciling.
Yeah.
Tell me that process.
I'm not sure that Hazel Atlas did any hand-painted glass.
Who would do that then?
That would have been early on if they had hand-painted. They went fairly early in terms of doing like decorated tumblers and decorated packers ware, which was product containers. And one of the pieces you brought in with tulips on it, chances are that was either a jam jar sold full of jam, or it might have been Cool Whip, or not Cool Whip.
Something, but you could use the glass.
Cheese Whip.
Yeah, Cheese Whiz.
And
was it common for women to work in the glass factory? Did they have their job there?
Yes,
okay.
They did. Yeah, mostly decorators. It was not until really maybe in the last 20 years it became common for women to actually be blowing glass, doing the hot glass part of it. I recently saw a photograph from, I think it was the 1930s, 1940s, of a factory up in Pennsylvania that you could see that one of the carrying in boys, and I have to do quotes around that, was actually an African American woman. That would have been very innovative at that time. Now, doing the decorating, and that also included doing cutting and some fairly intricate talent requiring functions, acid etching, that very often would have been done by women.
And how would they learn that, Tom? Would someone teach them how to do that?
Same way that the male glass workers would learn, they would be apprenticed.
So would they have a quota? Like you'd have, I don't know, so many of these tumblers or something you'd have to paint a day?
Yes.
To meet your quota to get paid?
Oh, yeah.
And I had one little thing here with some, it's actually gold. How did they put gold leaf onto that?
That's also applied with some form of silk screening. And I wish I knew more exactly how silk screening worked, but if you see multiple colors on a piece of glass in terms of a decorated piece that is not hand painted, it has to either be a decal decoration, in which case you can do the entire decoration just by applying a decal and then firing it on. It also does have to be annealed. Or if it's a silk screen, each one of those colors is squeegeed on separately through
Isn't that amazing?
A literal silk screen.
I mean, just think how much time it was devoted to just doing a tumbler or a bowl or something.
But you're working at extreme speed. I mean,
they would be almost like a machine themselves, I think, after you've done hundreds and hundreds of these.
And chances are, if you're doing a multicolor silk screen, you're just doing one color all day long. And then you're passing it to probably the woman next to you, and she does another color. And if there's gold, then a third person would do the gold, like an assembly line.
That's amazing. Yeah. What was the demise of the glass factory, you think, in Harrison County? Foreign competition?
That was a major one. Probably three major things that can be attributed to what killed off the glass industry in the United States. Foreign competition, definitely one, and particularly with glass coming in from Asia. We did have the union. The union was involved fairly early on with the glass industry, and they at least did their best to ensure that decent wages were paid. Now, I'm sure a lot of the workers would have argued that, no, I really should be being paid more than this, but at least they were being paid a set wage, and one that could not compete with Chinese workers.
Yeah. Japan and
all of the other, mostly Asian. There was also a lot of competition from European, particularly.
It just seems like the mid-'80s, though, this all just sort of disappeared.
Because the other thing that happened, or two other things that happened in the mid-'80s is, and maybe I'm going to come up with a third one, a lot of the factories at that point had been around for maybe 50, 60, 70 to as much as 100 years, and they'd never been upgraded.
So they were dinosaurs.
So yeah, you either were faced with a need to upgrade your equipment at a very high cost, or you simply couldn't compete.
Mm-hmm.
Third thing, and this was perhaps as big a thing as any, was it was towards the end of the 1980s that natural gas skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
And companies that were accustomed to be able to afford the fuel that they needed to run their furnaces, which furnaces have to run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You cannot turn the furnace off once you've started melting the batch in it. You can keep adding additional batch to it and melting that, but once you stop the process, you basically destroyed the furnace and it has to be rebuilt from scratch. So they needed a source of fuel that could be reliable for 24 hours a day.
And they just couldn't compete.
And once the cost went up as high as it did, particularly towards the late 80s, but it started in the early to mid 80s, there was just no way you could possibly compete.
And I think too, I'll add this in, my opinion too, is at one time everything was made out of glass. Then you had the plastics coming in. But think about like milk bottles, the glass insulators on the electric poles. I mean, everything was glass.
Yeah. And that actually is the fourth thing that I was going to bring up, that people became accustomed to plastics. Kind of the way we lived changed, and the idea of having something that you couldn't put in the dishwasher, for instance, or that you couldn't dispose of after you used it, just didn't fit the lifestyle anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, I mean, your pop bottles.
And it's interesting now that you do have a small resurgence of people who are looking at the dangers of the plastic particles that we end up ingesting without knowing it, who are going back to glass, like for their children.
I think things taste better in glass. I don't know about, but I remember like pop tasted better to me back when it was the glass bottles than what we have today.
Yeah.
Before we close, I want to talk about acro agate. That was a big factory here in Clarksburg for the marbles.
Yeah.
Tell me what you know about acro agate.
Well, acro agate actually started in Akron, Ohio, which is where the acro part of their name came from, but they only operated there for 2 or 3 years before they moved here in the early 1900s. Was it 1911, I think?
Very early. I could probably put my 1915.
Okay. I knew it was fairly early on. And they were probably one of the major producers of marbles in the entire country.
And it wasn't just marbles either, was it? I mean, they made other little things.
Eventually it went on to other things, but marbles was the main thing originally. Then the Westite Glass Company down in Weston, which was making slag glass flower pots and vases, ashtrays, other decorative items, I think it burned, but the molds were then sent to acro agate, and they were able then to expand into that same market. And right now, it's their slag glass. Slag glass is a little bit hard to describe without being able to hold up a piece and show you.
I think we have some here in the museum. We'll put a picture up of it.
It is a mixture of colors. Sometimes just a single color and some white swirled through it. Sometimes 2 or 3 colors swirled through it. And it is extremely popular still with collectors today. And people will collect the same form. For instance, the flower pots, which they made thousands of, because you can have one flower pot with a really pretty color, then right next to it, the same flower pot, but with a completely different appearance because of the way they swirl the colors around in it.
So that was a real technique all its own too, just for that type of glass. Marbles are very expensive too, aren't they, as collectible?
They can be, yes, especially if you find marbles in the original bag, the acro-agate marbles. Those are really sought after by collectors, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing the presentation on marbles at our gathering this year, because it gives people a chance to see some of these collectible items that will not easily turn up on the market.
Well, you may have it stuffed in a drawer somewhere
But
and don't even realize that you have a
something
valuable...
from your childhood that you don't even know is right now highly sought after.
Another thing people like to collect are the paperweights.
Yes.
Was that a whole industry of its own, just doing paperweights?
Pretty much.
Okay.
And that's really allied to the studio art glass movement, where you've got studio artists mostly creating freehand things, either in their own small shops or in groups of maybe 5 or 6 local glass workers getting together and pooling their resources to be able to afford the gas and whatever they need to run their furnaces. But a whole different skill level. If you look at paperweights, the detail is just absolutely amazing. Yeah, I fell in love with paperweights.
I do too. I love them. They're so interesting.
We have a large collection at the museum because I keep buying them.
Well, we were talking earlier. Once you get started in glass, you never stop. It's addictive.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to have to run out of time, Tom. But thank you for coming today and talking about all the glass and everything. And I encourage everyone to visit your museum.
I hope they will. I would love to be able to show them around. If you do visit the museum, I'm not there every single day, but ask if I'm there. And if I am, I will come and give you a tour.
And they're very friendly ladies that I've met in there.
Yes.
And you also sell some pieces of glass too.
We do have a museum shop where we have extra duplicate pieces of glass as well as some of our vendors who rent cases from us.
Yeah, so please make a trip up to Weston and Appalachian Glass too to watch, and the beautiful glass they have for sale in there too, the glass balls and everything. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I thank you so much for coming today. It's been a joy talking to you. I could talk glass all day. I love it.
Well, I could too. So it's a good thing you're cutting me off.
So thank you all for listening. And remember to make each day count, because you are making history today. Thank you.
Silence of your wildwood, to the rhythm played by every mountain stream, it becomes a lullaby every time that I come home to West Virginia in my dreams. West Virginia mountain melodies, there's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain melodies. I feel secure in the arms of your green valley. There's a peace you've given me that's yours alone. Take me in like a child to the gentle of your wild West Virginia. I'm coming home. Your West Virginia mountain melodies, there's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain melody. West Virginia mountain melody, there's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain melody.